Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. An excellent question posed by parents is, how can I tell if my child, specifically my adolescent child, is experiencing depression? As in depression, there are some common signs and symptoms to look out for, and with adolescents, specific ones. Let's take a look at a few of them. For example, when we look at habits and routines. Eating, for example. Is your child overeating or undereating? Are they oversleeping, undersleeping? What is their engagement like? Are they engaging in activities with school, work, or socializing with their friends like they used to? Perhaps they're more withdrawn and isolated. They're not attending classes like they used to. Their grades are suffering. They're not attending, let's say, soccer, if they enjoy playing soccer with their friends or they're part of a club. They're not going to work. So these are some signs to look out for. When we take a look at their social interactions, are they hanging out with their friends like they used to? Are they calling their friends? Are they engaging with their friends? What about social media? What kind of content are they following or posting, for example? Is it darker content material? Is it related to their moods and their emotions? When we take a look at their emotions, somebody who's experiencing depression could show signs of sadness, thoughts around perhaps suicidality, not wanting to live, dark thoughts around that, perhaps showing signs of losing faith, not believing things like they once used to, especially when it comes to God and life and hope. So a lot of people can show loss of hope and faith and just feeling lost. Perhaps when it comes to emotions, showing signs of regression as well, and how they interact with their peers, with their siblings, or even you, the parents. So these are also signs to look out for. What do we do about it? We want to create a safe space for our children to be able to come to us, or perhaps another adult, or a friend, or somebody in the community, a teacher perhaps, or a mentor. We want to be able to make it safe for them so that they can come to us so we can get the help that they need. Take them to a professional counselor, the doctor, or somebody else that they can talk to help them move from that place of darkness to that place of light. It's very important to create that place of trust and not be the haram police when they come to us with these dark, negative thoughts. This is how we can truly help our children get out of that dark place again.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته, and welcome on Youth Matters with me, your host Sakina Habib. Now, I'm sure that we've all been listening to depression nowadays, youths having it and, going through a lot in their lives. And we need to really find out some of the symptoms and the reasons of what is actually leading to depression. I think these are very important questions that need to be highlighted in today's time and era. And to have this very informative discussion, I would like to invite a registered psychotherapist, the Muslim counselor, Sister Barak Hussein, on board, who will enlighten us on what it is like to have depression in youths and what are some of the key steps that we can take to overcome. Without much further ado, I would like to welcome her. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam. Inshallah everyone's well.
Inshallah, alhamdulillah, all well, and inshallah, all well on your side as well. So, Sister Barak, today's topic is a very interesting one, and I think we really need to delve deeper into it. With your expertise in this field, we would like to know what do you think? What is the number one cause of depression in youth and children and kids?
Well, these days it's very clear it's the pandemic, right? The impact of the pandemic has truly impacted our youth and children in terms of isolation, in terms of not connecting with people face to face, online studies, the social media interaction. So a lot of that has contributed, I would say, to the depression that we see nowadays. It's also, there's not one cause of depression. There's a variety of a combination of things. First and foremost, we take a look at the biogenetics, right? The biology, the hereditary factors as well. Just like sometimes people inherit physical illnesses from their families, same happens to mental health illnesses such as depression and anxiety. So it could be something that's passed down genetically. It could be a chemical imbalance. Just like, again, with somebody who has, let's say, diabetes, there's a chemical imbalance there where they're not regulating glucose in their system properly and they need medication to create that balance. So same thing sometimes with depression. Sometimes childhood trauma, sometimes incidences, when we say childhood trauma, it could be incidences that could trigger something that's already inherently there genetically, or it could be an actual incident of trauma. It could be abuse, could be sexual abuse, physical abuse, bullying. All of these could be triggers that could contribute to depression, as in any mental health illness. So there's not one root cause, there's a variety of different factors, including how children are raised, their overall wellness, lifestyle, like all of these contribute to that.
Yes, yes, that's very right. I like how you mentioned about childhood trauma, because lots of people go through that, and then they're unable to speak much about their journeys or share it with everybody else. So they sort of just keep it piled up within themselves, and then as they grow into these adults, they feel like things get very limited, and they live in, like you can say, a bubble, and in a life of constraints and all of that.
Exactly.
The next question is that. Yes, the next question is that is there a difference between child depression and adolescent depression, or are they the same?
Well, essentially, it's the same in terms of symptoms, but they're shown differently. So, for the most part, childhood depression could show in terms of their behavior, child's behavior, their appetite, the way they interact with their friends. So, it could be from the cognitive behavior, physical behavior, as well as how they interact with their environment. So, there's not, let's say, one type of symptom that can tell you that. There's a variety, a combination of them. But in children, it's different than in adults in terms of the behavior. So children will show outbursts of anger, perhaps, or sadness or emotion, whereas adults will tend to, let's say, hold their emotions more. It will come out perhaps in withdrawal from their activities around them. And in children, you can see it perhaps in the way they interact with their friends. It could be through anger, or it could be withdrawal as well. So there's not one telltale symptom that could tell you that. It's important to observe your child's behavior if it's not as usual in terms of their eating, their sleeping. Bedwetting could also be an example, or that's more related to anxiety than depression, but just some specific things to look out for in terms of changes of behavior. That could be signs that could let you know that there's something off about your child. However, the adult depression is more visible in the sense, perhaps, of their withdrawal, changes in appetite, eating, sleeping, oversleeping, their engagement in their schoolwork and their activities around them. So these are things to be aware of, for sure.
And what do you think? What is the most serious risk of child depression?
As in any risk when it comes to mental health illnesses, suicidality or harm to others as well. And I know this is a subject that's not easily spoken about in our communities, and it's not comfortable to talk about. The reality is it's happening. Just like in any community, it's happening within the Muslim community as well. And if depression is not treated, if it's not looked out for, if it's not approached with compassion and support and medical, as well as mental health and spiritual and community support and family help, it could potentially lead to a child taking their lives, especially when it comes to bullying, especially when it comes to them feeling alone and isolated and not listened to and heard. So it's really important that when you see the signs of your child struggling with depression, not necessarily go to them and ask them, are you depressed? They're not going to know that. But to be aware of certain things so that you know what to do to help them. And that is listen to them, sit and play with them. When a child says, come and play with me, that's an opportunity to talk with them, listen to what their days have been like. They're not going to come and tell you, oh, can we talk? No, but when a child says, can we play? Or I want to play with you, spending time with them, then the conversation can go within the playing. Then you can hear things, like you can notice things, you can ask questions. So we want to be able to prevent where the person, young or older, feel that there's no way out, where they feel hopeless and helpless. There's always hope, and there's always ways of getting help and support. And we want to make sure that by talking about this, that we can reach those who are struggling, so they don't feel that their only solution is to end their lives. And especially when we talk about suicide, and I always say this to my own clients, that sometimes we do something that has permanent consequences to a temporary situation. Meaning, that we haven't always felt this way. We won't always feel this way. This is what we're feeling right now. But if you look at self-harm and wanting to end your life, that is a permanent solution for something that we are dealing with temporary. So we really want to be preventative and being able to connect with our children, our youth, whether it's going for a coffee with our youth or playing with our children, trying to figure out what's going on in their lives so we make sure we connect them to the right supports.
So, Sister Barak, what are some of the symptoms of childhood depression that we as adults should be able to spot or pick?
So again, it comes down to their behavior, right? So withdrawal from activities they were once enjoying, such as different games or toys, right? It could be lots of emotion in terms of tears. It could be outbursts of anger. It could be agitation or slowing down in things, fatigue, trouble focusing, concentration, right? They could be crying easily or feeling like crying, but they're not able to, perhaps sometimes. Sometimes also, like we mentioned, change of appetite, right? So they're under-eating, overeating, the oversleeping, undersleeping, that kind of thing, loss of interest in things that were once very joyful and pleasurable for them, right? So these are some things that to look out for. And also how they interact with their friends at school. If perhaps there's outbursts of anger, is because they're not able to express what's going on. And so perhaps irritability comes out in the form of outbursts of anger with their friends or their siblings, or even, let's say, they could be rude to you as your parent, as the parents, right? So it's some things to look out for to be aware of. And this is not, let's say, it happens once in a while. We're saying here, if this is consistent for the next 2-3 weeks, like a good chunk of time, then what we want to do is be aware of that and do something about it. Now, what do we do? Well, I would recommend going to your family doctor as a start. You know, your child is not possessed. There's not an evil eye. There's not, like, we right away jump to that. But no, really, start first with the medical doctor. Talk to the doctor. See, perhaps there's something physical involved. Right? So get a physical check. The doctor will know what to do. A mental health assessment, they'll check. Or they might refer you to a specialist, the child specialist or a psychologist or a therapist. So it depends truly on what the doctor sees, if this is also an area of their expertise. So once they assess the child, then you could do treatment depending on what the specialist is telling you, right? It could be medical treatment, meaning medication. Although I don't tend to jump to that right away with my own patients. What we do first, we try to look at their lifestyle. Is there a problem that's happening that's causing them to feel sad and withdrawn? Is it perhaps an actual situation that's happening that we can work on finding solutions with, right? So these are important to look at. Lifestyle changes. So we manage their eating, sleeping, exercise, and spirituality. So looking at it from a holistic perspective, seeing what's missing, what needs to be worked on to be in balance. So same thing with our children. So working on that, because what we eat affects our mood and our energy, right? And if we're not eating well, we're not sleeping well, then our energy is low. Exercise is also important. Mindfulness, this is a really wonderful way of slow, deep breathing and focusing. I know it's kind of hard with children. However, it can be a fun way of finding. If you look at YouTube, there's lots of mindfulness videos out there that for children that are great. So it's something that you could incorporate with them. So we tend to go the natural route first, but then with doctors and, with children, once they figure out what's going on, because sometimes it could be a deficiency in vitamins or nutrients that need to be brought up to help you feel better. So it's not necessarily a mental health treatment that's needed, but a physical treatment that affects the mental health aspect, right? So once you figure out what the balance is, depending on what you have as a medical practitioner, a mental health practitioner, then they will tell you what kind of treatment. Now, this is not to rule out medication. Sometimes you have children who are dealing with attention hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, and that's something that could also impact their mood and their energy. If they're, let's say, unable to focus, and the result is they don't do well in school, and then they feel really sad and upset, and it creates this whole loop, this vicious cycle of depression and anxiety. Sometimes ADHD is the root, not necessarily depression or anxiety. This is something that I've seen more often over the last 2 years that has exponentially risen in youth as well as in young adults who work with. And it's pretty common now. And if we don't treat it properly, then you have concurrent disorders such as depression, anxiety, along with the ADHD, ADD. So once that's factored in and looked into, then the others kind of iron themselves out. They're no longer there impacting the same way they once did with the ADHD. So that's something to consider as well. And you know, in our communities where we have kids who are running around who are misbehaving, they're naughty or whatever the case may be, we say, oh, he's such a naughty child, and they're so energetic, when in fact they could be under that spectrum of ADHD. And so there are medications that can manage focus and attention, and can also help treat the depression and anxiety that are concurrent with that. So a variety of different things, but overall, it is a lifestyle change that we want to take a look at. What if this child is eating really horrible foods, like we're talking processed sugar, white food that just goes right through the body, where you want to be eating complex carbohydrates that stay longer and keep you fuller, healthy sweets, meaning from fruits and vegetables rather than candies and chocolates, which are processed and go right through you, and the chemicals involved contributed greatly to childhood mental health illnesses, right, including ADHD. So these are things that we really need to factor in. If your child is not eating fruits and vegetables and not eating whole foods and proper protein and dairy, that's going to affect their mental health big time, as well as their physical health. So these are things to completely look out for. Now, let's say you're doing all of these things and your child is still suffering, then this definitely is a biochemical imbalance. There's something off there that the doctors need to assess. And with proper medication and treatment with a therapist, because there are strategies that you can do in therapy that can help you when you are feeling low and depressed. So these are all a lot of things to consider, but inshallah can be helpful for our families out there. And even those who are watching that are youth, you know, if you are struggling, then to use resources such as, for example, Nasiha, right? Or this is in North America. And if you're in the UK, you can use the Muslim Youth Helpline. And these are great resources that you could chat, call, and talk to a therapist for free, someone of a Muslim background who understands, who's not judgmental, and can support and help you get the right resources as well.
Thank you so much, Sister Barak, for sharing really insightful points. I think people really need to understand these things, from a psychologist's perspective as well, because we just go on these assumptions and judgments, as you said, which leads to then errors in the future. So I think we really need to consider these things. And this leads me to another question, and that is that, why is depression necessarily seen as something super negative in our society? To the extent that people sometimes consider you crazy and mentally unstable, and then someone to distance from. So why do you think this happens?
So this comes along with the territory of mental health, the stereotypes, the misconceptions, and I think it's rooted in fear. When we don't understand something, then we fear it, and then have all these assumptions and negative assumptions, and assume that just because somebody's dealing with a mental disorder, condition, or anything, that we think they're crazy, right? We label as crazy, when in fact it's not. Just like if we can normalize mental illness, and alhamdulillah, our Muslim community has come a long way since 5, 7, 8 years ago. Now we're having regular programs in our Imam Bargas, in our Hussainiyas, in our centers. We have all these great youth initiatives that are happening all over the Muslim world, in our communities as well, where we are destigmatizing mental health. We're normalizing it. We're having a normal conversation, just like it was a physical challenge, right? So when we approach it in that manner, and approach it from an Islamic compassionate perspective, a spiritual perspective, where we see how the Ahlul Bayt themselves struggled with, let's say, dealing with situations that caused sadness for them. I'm not necessarily saying depression, but you see, for example, our prophets, Nabi Allah, Ayub, the father of Prophet Yusuf, cried a lifetime for his son, to the point where he became physically blind due to his grief and sadness. Now, this, you could potentially diagnose the prophet here and say he was depressed, because depression is usually something that we look at over a 2-week, 3-week period, whereas this man spent a lifetime in grief and sadness of the loss of his son, yet he was still a mu'min, a man of connection to God, despite this grief and loss that he experienced, right? So you see here, we take a look at these examples of the prophets, the Ahl al-Bayt salamullah alayhim, where they dealt with tragic situations that caused sadness for them. Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, where he was known to, his tears would turn to blood from how much he grieved the battle of Karbala and what the tragedy that happened and befell his family, right? So, but then he dealt with it. How did he deal with it? He came out with the jewels of Sahif al-Sajjadiyya from his grief and how to deal with anxiety, how to deal with depression. His special du'as, if you look at Sahif al-Sajjadiyya, and this beautiful documentary that I worked with the Ahl Bayt TV, where we looked at Sahif al-Sajjadiyya, and I highly recommend you look at it in more detail because we don't have time now, where we took a look at how Sahif al-Sajjadiyya and other spiritual resources, so to speak, can help spirit when it comes to that. So maybe this is an effective resource for our parents and older youth, where you can use spirituality in this sense to help you manage it, right? So when we talk about mental health and depression from a holistic spiritual perspective like this, where we're using the examples of the Ahl al-Bayt salamullah alayhim, where we're using examples of the holy prophets and other Islamic figures that we connect with, then you see that, you know what? It's not as scary, it's not as foreign. In fact, it is embedded in our faith. I want you to keep a lookout for the Psyched for You project from the Imam Mehdi Marja'iyya Association project that I'm working with. And we are specifically linking Islam and psychology, Islam and mental health, and addressing these challenges and problems that our communities are dealing with. So if you follow their page, or you on my pages as well, you'll see that we're addressing these and tackling these to normalize. And if you look at it, if the Marja'iyya is tackling mental health and looking at how to normalize it, that says a lot for you, that it is linked. There's no reason for us to keep fearing anything we don't understand. We're going to fear, whether it's mental health or aliens. If we're not look at it and research it, which, by the way, apparently is in existence, parallel universes is something that our faith does look at, and the imams talk about that. So it is there. But if we don't research it, we don't ask questions, we don't speak with the right people, we don't speak with the right people who have the knowledge and expertise, we get misinformation, then we get confused. Then we build these fears and misunderstandings and stigmas, and then we push away from people who need the support and help. So if we have this open, compassionate, non-judgmental attitude, then we can have real conversations from the heart and connect people who are in need of that love and compassion. I always say, somebody who breaks an arm or a leg, we're quick to jump to bring food for them, do their laundry, take their kids, help them clean their house. But when we hear somebody has a mental break, a breakdown, a psychosis, an attempted suicide, they're in the hospital for mental health reasons, we shy away, we close up, we judge, we don't deal with it. And I'm inviting our friends and families, no, have the same attitude just as you would for a physical illness, for our children, for our youth, for our families, our communities. Because when we have that openness and compassion like the Ahl al-Bayt salamullah alayhim, then you are encompassing and helping, and you're creating this attitude of non-judgmentalism, which then allows people to get the help that they need. If we're constantly working with those stereotypes and discrimination against people who are dealing with mental health illnesses, you're isolating them. Isolation is probably the number one cause and root, you could say, as you were bringing it back to what we were saying, for people who wanting to take their lives. They feel nobody cares, nobody's there. What's the point? Whereas if we can show people we care, we are here for you, you are loved, we support you, we're not judging you, anything you need kind of thing, and getting them connected to the right supports, then people will feel that they're not being judged and they're more likely to be accepted and inshallah get the help that they need.
Yes, inshallah. I really like how you connected it to our prophet, as you gave the example of Prophet Yaqub, Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, and also Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam himself. We've seen in traditions and stories that he too, being a prophet, and being the best of all creation, went through depression and anxiety a couple of times, and so many times, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helped him. And that's why also, the Surah Al-Sharh was revealed, right? Rabbi Shrah li Sadri, and all these other surahs, right? To open up your chest and you feel relaxed and all of those things. So, as human beings, like, we should not think of ourselves as if I have a depression or if I have some sort of mental illness that, I'm in a negative spot, like something's abnormal with me, as you said, we need to invite these people to have conversations, right?
And it's normal, like we were saying, and when you were mentioning about the Prophet, he was very well known the year that his wife Khadija, alayhi salam, when she passed away, and his uncle, it was a very difficult year for him. The huzn that he experienced, right? And we hear about that. We hear about Sayyidah Fatima, salam Allah alayha, the huzn that she experienced when her father departed. Now, this is grief. Grief is different than depression per se, but grief can lead to depression as well, right? And there are strategies and tools. And I want to finish off with this beautiful ayah from the Quran, one of my favorites that I always use when I talk about mental wellness and mental health, from Surah Al-Ra'd, Thunder, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Ala bi dhikrillah tatma'inna al-qulub. Verily, with the remembrance of God, do our hearts find tranquility and peace. And yes, there is a huge connection. Maybe we can talk about it another time, inshallah, the connection between psychology and spirituality and mental health, because there's a huge link, and it's one of my favorite discussions as well. So I leave you with that, inshallah, and encourage all of our friends, our youth, our families. If you are struggling, please reach out. One of the first steps you can do is to talk with a mental health professional through Nasiha. So inshallah, we can put Nasiha up on the screen. You can reach them through social media, through their phone, through text, chat, as well as this is in North America. And in the UK, you can reach out to the Muslim Youth Helpline. And then I'm sure in your local area as well, you have some great supports. I believe there's a great group called I Care Space or something like that. I
Yes,
work with them.
yes, I do.
Wonderful.
Yes, we do.
Connect with them to see if they have local resources. I've done a few programs. I've done a program with them and some other projects, and they're wonderful in terms of normalizing mental health in your area as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Barak, for joining on today's program and for taking out your precious time. And I hope that our viewers would really benefit from today's conversation. Thank you so much. Jazakallah.
Bless.
Thank you, viewers, for joining on today's program. Sister Barak shared some really important points related to mental health and depression and all of that. We're going and inshallah, I hope we can work out on ourselves in these areas. Inshallah, if there is any help that's needed, then we can always contact the professionals who are involved in these fields to get some help. Okay. Thank you very much for joining on today's program. This is your host Sakina Habib signing off. Jazakallah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.